Sunday. It is the last day of August. I don't think I'm going to be putting another book in. So I think today I'm going to talk on a few things on my experience of posting every single day a video format reel on Instagram, TikTok and YouTube, which is new. I never had a YouTube account until August. And then I'm going to talk about the books that I have read this month. I've read 16 books, all of them are Apple Books audio format. It is a mix of things. I was looking for the free options, so this is why we have like book one of a series. So the caliber is, I was just going with the flow. I'm just going to go with the first book I read this month was Kings and Sorcerers, a short story. It is a novella that's part of the Kings and Sorcerers series, just a bit of a standalone. It was the first book I've read this year from Morgan Rice, narrated by Kevin Green, published by Luke Military Management, published most of the books that I have listened to this month. Pretty much the demographics are very run-of-the-mill similar. So this was a fantasy. Not much I can really say. It was a short story. I wasn't really familiar with the world, so it was a great way to get a bit of a taste, but I knew that this wasn't exactly what this book was about. The book one of the series is called, so I listened to that one too, and that one, again, Morgan Rice, second book I've read from her, and the narrator was Wayne Farrell. And what I can say is that the first book, it was 15 minutes long, the novella, and then this one was 8 hours and 19 minutes long, just to get you to understand. This is fantasy, it's called Rise of the Dragons, so yes, they are dragons. That's kind of what it is. So sticking with Morgan Rice, another book that I read from her, there were two additional ones that I read, both to do with vampires, where we're on that. So the first one was Turned. I thought it was really interesting. Honestly, it was giving me a little bit of an insight, like the American public school system, because it's contemporary, it's urban fantasy, it's got vampires. It was narrated by Brianna Knickerbocker, and this one was published in 2011. Now, the other book with a vampire from her was called Before Dawn. So Turned is part of the Vampire Journals, and this one is Vampire Fallen, and again by Morgan Rice, but narrated by Melissa Durbin, and same publisher, just it was published in 2020. So I thought, because in Turned, the protagonist's name was Caitlin, and she had an awful mother, and she had a younger brother and there's vampires involved. So I thought this one was a prequel that kind of gave us a little bit of what happened to her dad, what happened, what made them move from town to town. There were a few things that were different. So again, this protagonist's name was Caitlin. There were vampires involved. She had a younger brother that she loved and a mother that she despised. A father who wasn't a great dad, and surprisingly a sister, who I thought maybe they didn't mention it. As the story unfolds, I realized they are not the same person. They're definitely not the same person. But like, it was strange. And the one thing, a book's saying I love you after knowing each other for like 5 minutes is wild. No, she did this twice. So I'm getting messages here. Anyway, so that's what I found rather strange. And sorry, this is going to be a long one. I don't really care. I'm not going to be cutting, chopping and changing. So we're going to go on with this. Then the next books that I read, the next author was Elana Johnson. I read The Island House. So that was getaway bay romance. Woman gets divorced, uses some of her divorce settlement money to buy herself a house so that she can just get away. And I thought it was really sweet. I love romance elements. I loved that there was home renovations, but that was just secondary to the plot. The second book I read from Elana Johnson was Just a Secretary, and this is from the Sweet Southern Romantic Comedy series, which I found very confusing because when I tried to look this book up on Storygraph and on Goodreads, there was a different author. It was the same name. It was a similar book cover, and it was the same series but different authors. And I found that very confusing. But this was published by Creative, both of the books, Creative Works, and 2022 publication. I loved Just a Secretary. Workplace romance is nice in a book. Not necessarily ideal in a workplace scenario because there's a lot at stake here, but I quite enjoyed this book. It was entertaining and I really enjoyed it. And I read that one a little bit more recently, which is why I'm really talking on it more. And then the next author, and both were narrated by Terry Clark Linden. Love her work. The next one would then be Sophie Love. I read 4 books from Sophie Love. The first one was Love Like This, and it's from the Romance Chronicle series, narrated by Elaine Wise. The second one was For Now and Forever at Sunset Harbor, narrated by Elaine Wise. And the same thing with Love Check. This one was narrated by Olivia, which is a synthesizer, and that was honestly the worst book I read this month. There was a lot of repetitive words and phrases. Like the first time she said, each step punctuated. I thought that's great. And then every now and then she would use the same phrase, punctuated, happened in every single chapter. She kept on talking about this person's analytical brain. Analytical brain happened multiple times in the same paragraph, and every single chapter had included it. Hockey romance, I think it's the second hockey romance that I've read this year. I am from South Africa, so we have field hockey, which we just call hockey. We don't do ice hockey. And so, fine, I don't really get the whole fuss. I mean, it's a different build, it's a different speed, it's a different sport entirely. But like, I just was very confused. She was in the middle of a love triangle that I just didn't understand. I didn't really feel invested in the story. It wasn't well written. It felt very off-brand for Sophie Love. So that was like the worst book I read this month. Then we had Just One Kiss. Oh, I think that was my favorite one from Sophie Love, Porsche by Sea. Now, this month I read most of the books included home renovations, whether it was a romance or a murder mystery. Home renovations were involved. Everybody's daddy was missing. It actually got quite annoying that she would constantly, especially with another author I'm going to mention, Fiona Grace. I remember reading some of her books last year where her dad, the cupcake one, the dad has disappeared and she goes back to the town the last time she saw her dad, and Fiona Grace does this all the time. And it's just like, where are all these fathers? Why are they missing? And it's not like he just walked out and no, like they're presumed dead because he just walked away. So there's this vacant house that needs to be renovated, and with the renovations, some of them have like bed and breakfasts that are big enough. The houses are so big they have a library and they have a ballroom. I'm like, this is unhinged. Maybe in America these things are regularly happening, and same thing. So both, I felt like I want to talk Fiona Grace and Sophie Love because it feels like they're the same author. Then we have, talking about Fiona Grace, there were a few murder mysteries and a few romances, and the books that I read from her were A Villa in Sicily, Olive Oil and Murder, a Cats and Dogs cozy mystery. Love that. I love The Fox. This one was different from the others, and most of these women are in their 30s that I've been listening to their stories, and this one, she's in her mid-30s, but she's never been really kissed, never been in a proper romantic relationship. Most of them, the story starts with a breakup and possibly losing their job at some point, possibly. That's basically, the catalyst is that they've lost their job, or they've broken up with their long-term partner, or they've just gone through a divorce, and this is what sparks a change. And so she takes a risk. She goes all the way to Italy, and she does home renovations, and then someone dies. It looks like she's the person who did it, is the person who was guilty, and so now she needs to find out who done it. It was a lot of fun. There's obviously a bit of a language barrier that makes it difficult. She's an outsider, and that's one of the reasons why she is the number one suspect. The next one by Fiona Grace was Murder in the Manor. This was a Lacey Doyle cozy mystery. Same thing. Home renovation, murder. Honestly can't remember because they were just so similar, all the books that I've been reading. Always With You, Endless Harbor. This one, there was no murder, but there was some kind of mystery. There was a bit of romance. There was a divorce and something like to that effect. Same story, and home renovations. And then the last one from Fiona Grace that I read, which didn't include a home renovation, was, and there's another one that I'm missing. No, Murder in the Manor. There was a murder, I did mention, but there wasn't home renovations. In that one, there was So she moves to the UK and she goes into antiquing is something that apparently you do as a millennial or a woman in your 30s. And antiquing is another theme that comes up in all of these ones. Then we have, I said, Always With You. And then the last one was Thistlewood Manor, Murder at the Hedgerow. I love this. It was a historical fiction, murder mystery, no home renovations. They're living in the old times, and I had lots of fun with that one. Anyway, that was fun, and that's part of the Eliza Montague Cozy Mystery. Loved it. Then I've gone through the batches, the individuals, authors that I read, starting with Mona Ingram, Loving from Afar. This one, it reminded me of Talking at Night, which is one of the book club books that we read last year. Talking at Night, which sounds like another popular book where you have like these people who are meant to be when they were teenagers. She didn't understand why this cool kid who has a motorbike, and then they have this love, and then something brings it tears them apart, and then years pass where they find themselves, maybe go into other relationships, and then find themselves back together, and then you find there were misunderstandings. And honestly, communication would have helped if people could communicate. So that was Love from Afar. It was okay. Then the next individual was by Katherine Center, self-narrated, and it was The Guy at the Wedding. So Loving from Afar was narrated by Madison, Apple Books digital voice. And there's some people who say that I felt like it was digital. I'm like, no. Sometimes the digital voice will say when they should say it, or they would say something else because they just can't read abbreviations properly. And then it weirdly switch from the male voice to the female voice, which Madison does sometimes. And then The Guy at the Wedding, that was a short story. I actually thought that was quite cute. I thought that was a really sweet book. That was by Katherine Center, self-narrated. I really loved her work. And then, so I think that covers everything. I think it was good that I batched them in that way. The best book I read this month, I think Justice Secretary and Thistlewood. Those were the last books I read this month, and I quite enjoyed them. They're very recent, and they were a little bit more fresh compared to the other books. They were good, strong books, but I just kept seeing the same plot, the same theme, the same formula repeated multiple times. I just didn't like that. Then the most read author, I mean, it's a three-way tie between Morgan Rice, Sophie Love, and Fiona Grace. The worst book I read was I told you, Love Check by Sophie Love. I usually don't put a worst book, but this one, it was really bad. I didn't look at the ratings, but it was getting around 2 on 3 different platforms, which makes sense. Anyways, that's been this month. The reason why I've mostly been doing audiobooks is because I've been doing a lot of writing. So I started off the month working on my fantasy novel. Halfway through the month, I handed it over to my beta readers. I'm still waiting for feedback. And then I moved on to writing a romance novel and co-authoring a fantasy novel, and so it makes it hard for me to get through a lot of the books that I'm reading. I am currently halfway through Lucky Girl, hoping I can finish this in September. It's a good book. It's not like plot driven, so it's taking me a little longer than I expected. I've also got a book that I'm reading on Kindle. I quite enjoyed the first book, but because I am splitting my focus on multiple things, I haven't really gone that far. I think about halfway through on that one. And yeah, so that's been August. Oopsie, I'm gonna drop this.